I. Anderson of 712 Kemp Road West, Greensboro, North Carolina 27410. Andy's phone number is area code 919-855-0433. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw on January 1st, 1989 at Andy's home in Greensboro, North Carolina. This is tape number 1 of 2 tapes. See, Andy, if you could just give me your name and address and phone number, if you would.
My name is Francis I. Anderson.
Commonly called Andy.
Right. I live at 712 Kemp Road West in Greensboro, North Carolina, 27410. My telephone is area code 919-855-0433.
Okay. And then maybe if you could take us back to when you started at Oldsmobile and what kind of position you started in.
I started at Oldsmobile the 15th of September 1944, and I was a counselor to the Labor Relations Department.
Okay. What did a counselor to the Labor Relations Department do?
He did most everything that came along. But he, of course, interviewed employees who had problems, or thought they had problems, and took complaints, but the principal duty was to prepare the investigation of grievances and to assist in the processing of grievances through the ultimate arbitration step, which was the umpire.
Okay.
So that it also involved the duty of investigating grievances, settling them if that was indicated, and writing the briefs for the umpire and appearing as a counsel at the umpire arbitrators' hearings.
Okay.
That included not only the cases at the Oldsmobile plant in Lansing, but cases in other plants that we were operating at the time, which included plants in Janesville, Wisconsin, and in Kansas City.
Okay, those were our 2 wartime plants other
Right.
than the Lansing plant.
Right.
Okay. Did you get to any of those other plants?
Yes, I did. I got to all of them.
Okay. What were we doing at Janesville?
We were making shells, as I recall.
Okay. And at Kansas City?
Same thing.
Same sort of thing. Okay.
Most of the guns we were making were made there in Lansing.
Okay. Then during the wartime, that early time, were the grievances and those kinds of things settled in a different manner than they would have been after the war?
Not really. You see, after the General Motors strikes in the 1930s, and the beginning of the recognition of unions, United Automobile Workers, contracts were negotiated between the corporation and the unions. And the behavior of the people involved in the plant and the supervisory personnel were governed by the regulations in the contract with respect to their day-to-day activities. And of course the corporation and the unions were theoretically bound by the provisions of the national agreement, in addition to which various forms of local agreements were also negotiated.
Did the war supersede any of those things or set them aside, so to speak?
No, the war didn't set them aside. I had one rather interesting experience the first week I was at Oldsmobile. We also operated, as you know, what we call Plant 2, or the forging operation. And we were making a great many shells at that plant through the forging operations. And we had a wildcat strike the first week I was at Oldsmobile, at the plant 2. And I went over with Mr. Mahoney and Mr. Dakin, who was the manager of the plant at that time. The earlier manager was, perhaps, I guess he was at that time, Mr. Howell was the manager before Mr. Dakin. But Mr. Dakin was present then, and also Mr. John Dykstra, who subsequently became the president of Ford Motor Company. And the various people at Oldsmobile at that time were somewhat bewildered by just what to say to the War Labor Board about this wildcat strike. And I was with them at the plant, and I had, having just come from the government service, some knowledge of how they operated. So I told Mr. Dykstra and Mr. Mahoney and the rest of them not to worry about it. I'd take care of that. So
After one whole week.
I don't think it was a whole week. So I went ahead and prepared and sent a telegram to the War Labor Board, and that was that. That was the end of that. But thereafter, any changes in the national agreement that affected in any way our relationship with employees was negotiated either under national agreement or under local agreements, plus its day-to-day administration, and give and take on both sides.
Yeah. What was the little wildcat strike about?
I don't really remember, but I think it had to do with either a wage or standards dispute, as most of them did.
Okay. Who were you working for when you hired in, Andy?
I was with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I was one of the local FBI agents in Lansing, and had been there for several years at the time I went with Oldsmobile.
And then when you first came at Olds, who was your immediate boss then?
Harold McFarland was my immediate boss, and he was working for Mr. Bell at that time, who was the personnel director at that time.
Where was Bill Mahoney?
Bill Mahoney was director of labor relations.
Okay. Now, how did Bell and Mahoney relate then? Your side of the thing wasn't under Mahoney.
Yes, it was.
It was, okay.
Yes, I worked indirectly for Mahoney, and then very soon thereafter, Mr. Bell retired, and Mahoney became personnel director.
Oh, okay. All right. Where was your office at that time?
In Building 60 on the ground floor.
Okay.
My office was in the corner.
Okay. In the corner of the north wing?
Yeah.
Okay. Then, how long did you stay on that kind of an activity?
Well, various activities were eventually placed under my area of responsibility, including such things as the administration of group insurance, workman's compensation, unemployment compensation.
Did that all happen kind of in the 40s?
It happened at various intervals.
Okay.
Some happened in the 40s.
All right.
And Oldsmobile, prior to that time, had really not devoted a great deal of attention to these other matters, that is, to workman's comp or to unemployment compensation. And I began the processing of unemployment claims when I started getting notice of them from the Employment Service, Employment Security Commission, of claims that were chargeable to Oldsmobile's account. And I don't think Oldsmobile had ever contested a case before that.
But we evidently had them, obviously.
Yes. Well, I could not find a record of having
really?
received hundreds of claims. And I contested them, and we were able to recoup several $100,000 in charges when we started contesting these, and then we contested all claims thereafter that we did not think were legal claims, for some reason should not be granted. And consequently, the corporation realized the millions of dollars that were involved in that type of an operation, and tried to institute, in fact did employ someone to devote full time to the handling of unemployment
at the corporation level.
At the corporation level, and therefore in all plant levels too, because they were paying unnecessarily hundreds of thousands of dollars that they should not had to have paid.
So this was sort of the beginning of that whole process.
Yes, I was invited, as a matter of fact, to join the corporation staff to do that, but that didn't appeal to me particularly.
When was that, Andy, about?
I'd say that was about 1945 or 6.
Okay.
About 1946, I would say. And then I was later on loan to the corporation personnel staff several times, one of which was for approximately a year.
All right.
During 19 and 50 negotiations, 48 or 50, when the pension plan was negotiated.
Okay.
I did a great deal of the research on industrial pension plans in the United States. And based on my legal experience, had briefed the plans of all of these various companies that had certain similar aspects. I converted those into briefs and made a book of them. And then, as a part of my duties, appeared before the General Motors administration and executive committees when Mr. Wilson was president of General Motors, and assisted the director of personnel research, who was, at that time was Mr. James Gillen, in making the presentations. And then, as we were negotiating with the UAW on a national basis, it became my area of responsibility to start drafting a pension program. And one of the reasons they wanted me to do that was because I had had some practical experience in dealing locally with the unions and with the union representatives on a local basis, and they were demanding a voice in the administration of the pension program. And consequently, I was endeavoring to accommodate this demand in a way that would be acceptable to the corporation. And as we started drafting the plan, they employed a man who had been with General Mills for 21 years to come in and assist. That was Earl Brain, who incidentally is my good friend. He had been with General Mills for many years and had much experience in that area. But anyway, as we neared the end of negotiations, the legal department of General Motors suggested that we should send up what we had in the way of a draft and let them review it, and that they would do the drafting. And when they sent that draft back, I started picking that apart, and finally they said, "Nuts, you do the drafting." So I did most of the drafting on the original pension program. With the exception of the financial aspects, we had an independent actuary from Metropolitan who was doing much of that. Who, incidentally, he subsequently became the president of Metropolitan Life Insurance Company.
Now, Andy, all of that happened as a result of kind of the union pressure, in a sense. We had pension programs long before that, did we not?
No. You had no hourly pension program. We
We
had
had-
a salary pension program.
But there were no hourly
no
pensions.
hourly pension program.
What
before
did a
that.
guy do?
The best he could.
Could he put money away in the company somehow? or-
Not unless he bought stock on the market,
Okay.
open market.
But we didn't have some kind of a program?
We had no benefit programs in that area.
None whatsoever?
No.
Okay. So this was the onset of the whole pension business
Right.
for General Motors?
For the hourly employees, right? And other, of course, unions, not just the UAW, but similar programs were negotiated in Canada
Uh-huh.
and with the other unions with which we dealt.
Okay. Well, were you there? We had a big strike in, was it 48 or?
I was there during all the strikes, yeah.
But we had to, wasn't that when they shut the whole country down practically?
That was, I don't remember whether it was 48 or not. but-
47, but somewhere in
Yeah,
there.
it was in one of the early years after the war. And I might tell you of an incident that occurred, an experience we had. We had anticipated difficulties with the union, that they might not be entirely open to negotiations.
Mhm.
And consequently, we had engaged space downtown in Lansing, office space,
Okay.
including the Olds Hotel.
Mhm.
And many of us moved some of our files and so forth down there. Now, I suggested that since the union started becoming somewhat violent in rare cases. For example, they tried to keep Mr. Skinner from going into the parking lot back of Building 60.
Mhm.
And we had several unpleasant incidents along the picket lines. And I suggested to Oldsmobile management that I thought that we would be able to get an injunction against this sort of thing and get back in our offices. That I thought their picketing was illegal. And consequently, I suggested that we hire a certain attorney there in Lansing, which we did. And within a matter of hours or days, we were back in the offices under court order. I might add that immediately we were criticized for not handling that purely through the General Motors legal staff. But they had not been able up to that time to get in any other offices, and they wanted to know how we did it.
Uh-huh. They were too slow. Okay. And then after that, then we were able to get in
We
and
were
out
able to get in
regularly.
the offices, yeah.
But that strike dragged on for months, didn't it? That was a several month long strike.
2 or 3 months.
Yeah. Okay. But that was the only kind of incident that you can remember that we ran into.
Well, yeah, so there were many small incidents,
Yeah,
but it's not the kind of thing that you remember.
Yeah.
I particularly remember that one.
Mhm. So you ended up working, were you folks then working down in the Hotel Olds for a period of time?
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh. Now, I assume, were you part of the negotiating team at that point in time?
On local negotiations.
On the local stuff?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. What, Andy, can you remember what kinds of things, just some examples of things that people were grumbling about, so to speak, at that time?
Well, you could go back and search the minutes. That would be the
Okay.
surest way of
Yeah.
doing it. But there were hundreds of things. But usually they would bring up a great many very silly things
Mm-hmm.
that they would demand that they knew they wouldn't get, just to talk about them,
Yeah,
to try to
yeah.
force another bolt through the door.
By the sheer weight of the volume of things.
Yeah. That was an expected technique in all the negotiations, but particularly in those days, you got some real
Did they tend to be focused more on safety or working conditions or those kinds of things?
Everything they could think of.
Everything, okay.
Safety, working conditions,
Money.
pay,
Yeah.
money, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then the national was handled through Detroit as it is sort of done today at that time?
Right, right.
Was there pressure from the Detroit side to settle, so to speak, at that juncture? Or?
No, no, not at that point, no.
Okay.
But, I mean, there is always a desire
Sure.
to settle as soon as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Get back to work.
Yeah. Okay, so then we'll jump back where we were then. You were up in the, doing the workman's compensation thing, and now at that point in time, were you still working for McFarland, or had he left?
I believe he had left at that
Okay.
time. The workman's compensation thing had been handled, and I use the word handled loosely, by Red Cherry, the employment
Oh, yes. I
manager.
remember
That is not to depreciate
No.
what Red did in any way,
that. Understand.
because he was very conscientious, but they just didn't think that that kind of thing was very important, and that after all, the state had a commission to take care of that kind of thing. But sometimes there have been suggestions that there might be some partisanship in those hearings.
Okay, then where did you kind of progress after that late 40s, early 50s point?
Well, in 1950, I believe that's when McFarland went to Livonia
Okay.
as personal director of the plant over there. And I was asked to become director of labor relations,
Okay.
which I did for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Now you would have been working for Bill Mahoney at that
Yeah.
point in time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then one day Bill said that he would like to have me handle the job of Director of Personnel Services, which I was already doing anyway.
But that job hadn't existed prior to that point as a title job?
No.
Okay. So that job then came into being 1960 then, or about?
Yeah.
Okay. So the 10-year span, during that 10-year span as Director of Labor Relations, anything that you can think of that was kind of unique or different or happening?
There were many things that affected Oldsmobile indirectly because it was on the corporate level in which I became involved on special assignments to the General Motors staff in Detroit. Although I never surrendered actually my responsibilities at Oldsmobile. During that time I was in Detroit all the time, sleeping in the General Motors building in the executive suite and eating it in the Fisher building, and sometimes not going outside for 3 or 4 days at a time.
Oh my gracious.
But I had another special assignment. That one lasted about a year. But I had another one by virtue of my FBI experience as a consultant to the styling section on industrial espionage.
Okay.
And so I was down there did work down there back and forth to Lansing, but I did most of it in the Detroit area for about 3 months.
That would be the stealing, so to speak, of ideas?
Right.
And plans?
Right. And designs. And as a result of my experience and recommendations, they employed full-time personnel officer, which they didn't have at the styling section.
Really?
For that purpose, although George I don't remember his full name right now, but they had one man on personnel, but they needed somebody to review everybody they hired and their habits, and asked me if I could get somebody for them. And I happened to know this friend of mine who was at that time security officer for Trans World Airlines out in Kansas City. And he had been an FBI agent, in fact, had succeeded me in Lansing as the FBI agent there. And I asked him if he would be interested in coming back, and he said he would. Well, anyway, they hired him, and he worked there until he retired, I believe sometime since I did.
But the task of that was to then look at incoming people more than things that were happening?
Well, it was to oversee completely the requirements for the security of information.
Okay.
That depends a great deal on the loyalty of who's working for
It
you.
does. Yeah.
And at that time, they had done nothing to really to control that.
Did you, maybe a bad question, but during that kind of that investigation, did you find that there were some problem areas? Or were...
Well, the problem area, I don't want to, it would not be discreet for me to
Well, I appreciate it. That's why I say it's probably a bad
fully,
question.
what I did, or who was suspected, if any, but
there were obviously some
problems
that needed
problems that needed everyday attention.
Yeah.
And the fellow that they hired had a great deal of experience in such matters, and I think did a good job for them.
Why, Andy, did they ask you to come down because of your FBI and legal background, perhaps?
I think so, yes. And the fact that I had been on a loan once, twice before. The vice president in charge of personnel at that time happened to have the same name as mine, but he was no relation. He was the fellow who died very tragically in a hunting accident.
Yeah.
Mr. Harry Anderson.
Okay, so then after that experience, you were still doing the labor relations task in Lansing,
And various personnel tasks, and I went on several other special assignments. If GM wanted to do some quick investigations, they would occasionally, and I did this once anyway, get all the FBI agents they had working for them, ex-FBI agents, so they could appear at different plants across the country at the same time, and they'd fly us out. I did that once or twice. And
to look into some particular problem?
Right.
Okay. So you got to use a bunch of the old, so
Well,
to speak, the old fellows. that you
Yeah,
were
and
working
of course I would get a lot of problems in Oldsmobile that had really nothing primarily to do with labor relations or, but because, as I say, my background and experience, it might involve anything. And for example, I made trips, I recall, immediately to Minneapolis, St. Paul, to Dallas and Fort Worth, various places to investigate problems that we had. Of course, ordinarily they would be with salaried personnel.
Did, Andy, would you have considered, would you call our labor relations during that period of time? Did we have good or bad?
I would say they were good.
And why?
Well, I think it was primarily because of the people we had. It depended a great deal on, I knew what management's attitude towards labor was, and it was good. By that I mean they wanted to be fair to them in every way. And by and large, we had good people working for us out in the plant. And our greatest difficulty would come because of union politics, when you might get 2 or 3 people who were running for union office locally, who were going to raise hell and put a prop under it, you know, and would cause some problems. But by and large, the people who worked for us and many of the union representatives, I had a great deal of respect for.
Would that have been different than we would have seen, like in the Detroit area?
I think so.
There was a significant difference.
I'm sure that you get some of that. It's hard to draw a line between black and white,
Yes.
you know, along that line. But most of the people that worked at Oldsmobile lived in the Lansing area and were good, solid citizens, and were not born troublemakers.
Mm-hmm.
As we got our share of those.
Sure.
Once or twice, but who knows why they were. We didn't think it was anything that had to do with their employment.
Mm-hmm.
But for some psychological reason, they might want to cause problems. But they were few and far between.
Andy, who were some of the managers at that time that you were working with out in the plant?
Well, when I came to Oldsmobile, of course, Mr. Skinner was the plant manager.
Okay.
Mr. Dykstra was, I believe, the production manager.
Did you have any dealings with those individuals directly?
Oh, yes.
What kinds of, what kind of a person was Skinner?
Mr. Skinner was a remarkable man. He was a very sharp, smart man.
Mm-hmm.
And he had not only the interest of General Motors at heart, but the interest of employees. And during all of my experience at Oldsmobile, I think that he knew more about what was going on in the plant than any other plant manager that I can recall. And I've known them all.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not to say that the others weren't good managers.
Sure.
But Mr. Skinner was a fellow, kind of a guy who would go out in the plant on his own, by himself, walk through and look at every operation in the plant.
Mm.
And he might talk to the people on the job out there. If he saw something that intrigued him or interested him, he would find out what it was all about.
So he would actually spend some time in the plant?
He spent time in the plant, he sure did.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew what was going on. And he was very forward planning and, in my opinion, honest in every way. Knowledgeable.
Okay.
He had, he brought, of course, some of the people that he brought to Oldsmobile, you may remember. Hey, Mr. Skinner was in the submarine service in World War I. And, of course, you remember Bob Barlow, who
Yes.
was there, and he was in the service with Mr. Skinner. And I think Mr. Skinner was responsible for his being there. In fact, after Mr. Skinner left, Bob knew that I was very fond of Mr. Skinner. And after he was in a nursing home out east, Bob would call me to tell me about seeing him. And then also Tom Darnton, Pete Monahan. Is it Monahan I'm thinking about?
Yeah. Monahan.
And Don
Burnham?
Don Burnham.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Skinner brought all these fellows in.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, and then the old Dale Carnegie course, I forget, that was rather interesting. I had a lot of old timers in it. I had, of course, a great deal of speaking experience, public speaking at that time, when I went to Oldsmobile, and made a good many speeches myself. I used to speak as a guest lecturer out at Michigan State. And then I was on the Bureau's approved list of speakers. I used to speak for the FBI in Canada and other places. And I talked about labor relations. Usually, I was the one who made any travel speeches. I remember speaking to a group over at Kellogg in Battle Creek one evening, and different places spoke on labor relations, and was interviewed from time to time by various people, including the knocked out at Michigan State who became an arbitrator, and then the head of the department when I started studying labor relations at Michigan State. And then we had a very famous, he became famous later, professor and a writer on industrial relations and industrial subjects. His name escapes me at the moment, who interviewed me. This was when we first started talking about automation. That was a big word in those days.
It scared all of the people.
Yeah, instead of sending fellows who wanted to talk about that to the public relations section, I don't guess we had a public relations man then. They'd send him over for me to talk to, and I would try to explain what I knew about the term and tried to downplay it a little bit.
Was that really something that the people out in the shop were worried about?
The people in the shop never seemed concerned about it particularly. It was not like the Industrial Revolution in England, no.
Yeah.
But the intellectuals were the ones who were concerned about it. In fact, this fellow I'm talking about, I'm sorry I can't think of his name at the moment, still writes. I see his name in the Wall Street Journal and in an article every night. And he's teaching at some graduate school. But I had some interesting experiences. I think at one time or another I met all of the presidents of General Motors up through, well, including the last one.
Okay.
From Mr. Wilson's time.
And you had mentioned you had met Mr. Sloan.
Yes, I met Mr. Sloan back during my college days. Met Mr. R.E. Olds, of course, and had a very interesting conversation with him. This is while I was in the FBI.
Okay. What, can you remember back to Sloan? What?
Yes, I was in a class on, taught by an old German whose name was Zimmerman, and he was a famed international trade expert. And the class I was taking was on international trade, and he knew Mr. Sloan and invited him to come down and lecture to his class, which Mr. Sloan did, and we had the privilege of going up and talking to him after the lecture.
That would have been kind of unique, wouldn't it?
Of course, it would be much more interesting if I had the opportunity now.
Oh, yes, right, because you would know what to ask.
Right.
And then you mentioned Wilson?
Yes, Mr. Wilson was the president when I was on loan during the pension negotiations, and of course he chaired the committee that
The executive committee, yeah.
making the decisions that, and we're hearing from us on the basis of the research that we had done in the Personnel Research Department. I was assigned to the Personnel Research section.
Did you get any feel for Mr. Wilson's, how he managed things or how he did things in those
yes.
discussions?
Yes, I got the opinion that he was willing to listen to others, but that he wanted all the facts, but that he was very plain spoken and outgoing. And I was always a great admirer of Injun Charlie, as he was called, and who subsequently became Secretary of Defense.
Right.
And I never had much sympathy for those people who criticized the comment that he made that what's good for General Motors is good for the country.
Of course, they always read it backwards.
I agree with that.
Yeah. What, Andy, after you got through, let's see, the labor relations task, you went off into the benefits end of the business.
I was already into those. I had those
But you were
activities
doing them,
before.
yeah. But now you've got the title.
Yeah.
Okay. Who went into labor relations that followed you then? You remember who that would have been?
Sam Donahue, I
Was
believe.
that Sam? Okay.
Yeah, I hired Sam in the first place.
All right. Okay. Was
And
Sam
then-
working for you at that juncture?
No, he worked for me for several years.
Mhm.
And then he went back into sales, I believe,
Okay.
over at the drive-away.
Product delivery, oh yes,
Product
that's
delivery.
where I remember him early
Yeah.
on. Uh-huh.
And then he came back into personnel
Okay.
when they changed my job.
All right. Now, at this point in time, your offices had they moved yet? Were they out?
Office never moved.
Your office didn't move yet? Okay. Okay.
Still in building 62.
Still in building 60? 60 or 62?
62 at that time.
Okay.
Oh, see,
So
we moved
you had
everybody.
moved somebody, some point in time, you had left 60 and gone to 62.
Yeah, and that was quite a few years before I retired.
Uh-huh.
They moved all of the personnel operations.
Right.
See, the medical department, employment, all the personnel activities in one time were in the basement. They occupied the whole of the basement floor of building
Mhm.
60.
Okay.
And then it all moved at one time after some remodeling to
Mhm.
building 62.
Okay.
That used to be the parts
Right.
building, you know.
It must have happened about the time the warehouse moved out, perhaps, maybe 59?
It could be.
Somewhere.
All these other activities too, of course, included in-plant feeding.
Mhm.
We had that responsibility and dealing with the various vendors and this
Mhm.
kind of thing.
So then, Andy, now that you've got the title for the personnel services and all that stuff, what happened from then on? What, did you continue to do that function
Continued to do that, yeah.
until you retired?
Yeah.
And when did you retire?
April the 1st, I believe it was, 1974.
Okay. What do you think was perhaps the most significant thing that happened at Oldsmobile while you were there?
Well, that it depends on what you mean by significant. So far as the corporation is concerned, or so far as...
I think as far as Oldsmobile Lansing.
Well, of course, the introduction of the engineering changes in the Kettering engine,
Okay, the rocket engine.
I think perhaps that is one of the most significant things that happened while I was there. Of course, any changes in personnel are significant, particularly to the persons who are
Who's
changed.
doing that? Yeah.
But we had a number of plant management changes while I was there. Mr. Skinner, let's see, there's
Skinner left at Wolfram. Did Wolfram take that job?
Wolfram went in next, and Harold Metzler was
Mhm.
next, I believe, and then John Bells.
Bells.
And John passed away, and then
Baker
Baker, I
never
had
got
retired.
here. Yeah.
I never saw him.
Yeah.
He was made manager right after I retired, and then Bob Cook, of
Yeah.
course. Bob Cook I have known for many years.
Can you tell me about Mr. Wolfram? Did you have any dealings with him?
Quite a few.
Okay, what kind of a guy was he?
Very difficult guy to deal with.
Was he?
I'd prefer to withhold comment.
Okay. Let's see, and then
Relationships.
Metzel came along afterwards. Did you say?
Yes.
Back up to Wolfram a little bit. How did Wolfram manage? Can you tell me a little bit about that? How did he manage the plant? Was he an out in the plant kind of guy?
No.
He was not.
I doubt whether he was ever out there.
Okay.
He was, Wolfram was rather self-centered. I hesitate to say this.
Well, I
he's
understand
gone,
that, but
but
trying to understand how he managed the place.
he would reach conclusions, instantaneous conclusions, without knowing really too much about what he was deciding, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay. Was he an authoritarian sort of individual?
Very, in the extreme.
Okay.
And he was more interested in his public appearances and the fact that he was vice president of General Motors.
Did he use any management by consensus or any of that sort of thing?
I don't think so.
Okay. Did Skinner use a consensus approach? Or?
He tried to get the opinion of other people before he made up his mind. Now, I perhaps should have mentioned that I also, for many years, attended the operating committee meeting.
Yes.
And of course, knew everybody in there for years and years. Now, as Tom Downey, for example, who, of course, was production manager there for quite a few years, I had met Tom before while I was visiting the plant in Janesville. He was manager of the plant in Janesville, which I believe was a Chevrolet plant before we took it over. And we took a great many Chevrolet people, including Tom Downey and Bob Rollis and Floyd Burr, I believe, was there. You remember Floyd?
Do not remember him.
And we did the same thing from Kansas City. A good many people came there from Kansas City. Some came to Fisher Lansing, Ruth Williams, for example. And we had some interesting experiences. I can tell you one that resulted in a change in the UAW agreement between General Motors and the United Automobile Workers. Something that happened there at Oldsmobile. We had just begun to operate the jet plant. And of course, the UAW had been boasting that they were going to get a uniform high aircraft rate. We had made proposals to the union on the rates for the operations at the jet plant. And we had about 3 classifications still in dispute. And the national agreement provided that you take certain steps in resolving rates, and if not, then they would be appealed and so forth and so on. And eventually that was one of the items, of course, that they could strike over. Well, I was pretty familiar with the procedural steps on rates. And so I suggested to Mr. Mahoney one day that I thought I knew how we could settle that. I said, there's one job in particular at the jet plant that they want a little more money on. And I said, if I can get the committeeman to agree, we'll give them another nickel on this job, and I can get the rest of them settled. So we agreed that we would do that. And we had the whole third step meeting, I believe it's called, that is with the international representative, before we can resolve any of these matters that are appealed on the way to the arbitrator, you know. So I got the agreement of the local committeeman over at the jet plant to do this, and then I said, well, we'll have an appeal meeting of the grievance committee, and we'll get the international representative. So I called him and got him in, and we held a meeting in which we agreed on all the rates, signed the minutes. The rates were fixed. And I guess that really blew the building apart down in the Union Building in Detroit. And so they came out and we had they wanted a meeting, and they had a high-powered international rep come out, and Earl Bramlett, who was, of course, eventually the vice president in charge of personnel, came out, and so I showed him these minutes, and that he went and showed it to the international rep. Of course, that settled it.
Yeah, that's all it does.
So I guess they still think I'm tricky, but all I was doing was following the national agreement. See, well, the national agreement was changed the next time.
So it could be. Yeah. Well, that's a case of being smarter than they were, so to speak. How about Downey? Tell me
Downey
about Downey.
he was a great guy. Tom was a down-to-earth guy. He had his problems personally, like many of us do, but Tom was a great guy. He was fair-minded, but he knew the automobile business. He knew production. And when he told a guy to do something, he expected him to do it. I'll never forget, one day I had a complaint from an employee. I believe it was over on the west side of the plant someplace. I forget what it was at the moment, but I remember that what the foreman and the general foreman and the superintendent had done were obviously wrong, and they somewhere along the road would be reversed after considerable embarrassment and difficulties. And it was unfair, I thought. So I went over to see Tom about it and just laid it out to him, what had happened. And that I thought it was a question of whether they're going to be reversed now or later, that I had talked to them and that they wouldn't listen to me. So he got the fellow on the phone and he said, now this is a situation. And he says, what do you think about that? And the fellow was, giving him a line of chatter, and so finally he got through. Tom says, well, he says, I want you to change it and do thus and so. And he said, take all the time you want to do it, just so you call me back in 2 minutes and tell me you've done it.
Okay.
That's the kind of guy Tom was.
And Tom spent a lot of time in the plant?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
He knew what was going on out there.
How did he ran the operating meeting prior to Rollins?
Right, right.
And how would he run that?
Well, he would just chair it, is all.
Okay.
They would usually have an agenda.
Okay.
And they'd go down the agenda, and then anybody else that had any problems. I used to, for example, give presentations on workman's comp problems and what the supervisors could do to help and try to avoid a lot of these,
Was there any work being done at that point in time?
Labor relations, they gave presentations on grievances on everything.
Yeah. Were people doing any work on trying to make the job so that they didn't create comp conditions?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
How are we addressing that, or how
through plant engineering methods and so forth? I'm sure you've done a lot of that yourself.
Yes.
For example, you got a lot of, and really I notice that OSHA is really into this now. It's giving a lot of plants a lot of trials, some big fines, especially in the meat industry, because of the problems that cause tenosynovitis and
carpal tunnel syndrome.
Carpal tunnel syndrome, that's right. This kind of thing.
Would you consider that, was Oldsmobile or General Motors in any of the forefront in that kind of arena, or not?
Definitely. Definitely. I've known the directors of safety for General Motors for many years and have attended safety meetings all over, and I used to go to the national meetings in Chicago and all over. But Dave Mole and Ken Hedges, both were really in the lead in General Motors in the country, in my opinion. Well, General Motors got national awards a number of times for their work in safety.
Yeah.
Of course, no place is ever going to be perfectly safe.
No. But
Depending on how people do the jobs,
it's all
if they do
dependent
what
on
they're
people.
supposed to.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't think.
Yeah. Well, Andy, go to, see, Mr. Metzel. Did you know Mr. Metzel?
Very well. I knew him before he became general manager.
Okay. How did he manage in contrast to like Wolfram and Skinner?
He was completely different from Skinner. He was completely different from Wolfram, but in a different way.
Uh-huh.
He was another one that didn't get out in the plant and
Okay.
see what was going on.
Both of those, Wolfram and he, were kind of product
Right.
engineering oriented.
Right, right.
Did Metzel, was he a authoritarian sort of individual, another one of those types?
Yes, but not to the same degree or exactly in the same way that Wolfram was.
Okay. Any consensus, management by consensus, or that sort of thing?
No, I wouldn't say that about Harold. He's very much the same way in his social life.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how I knew him socially before he became general manager. And of course, he had a great tragedy in his life. I probably wouldn't be able to do as well as he has emotionally. You know about
Yes.
his son and
Yep.
his family.
Yeah.
That's the reason there's a key to this door hanging right up by the door there.
Was that right?
I'll never forget that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. See, Belts, did you know Belts?
Very well.
All right. Now, there is a different kind of manager.
John and I were friends before he became manager.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, John was a doer, no nonsense, but he had a quick mind,
Mm-hmm.
and I think was fair-minded.
Did he do more of a consensus management sort of thing?
I would say he did. That, of course, is a matter of opinion.
Yeah, it's
a
degrees.
matter of degree.
Yes.
But you could talk to John. You talked to the other two guys, but didn't do much.
Listen.
But with Wolfram, you were very careful what you said.
Mhm.
Metzel, I don't know that I ever talked to him many times after he became manager, except social.
Yes.
We had mutual friends.
Mhm.
Harold Walter lived right behind us. And he and Metz had been friends, hunted together a lot and all that.
Okay. See, Mahoney stayed as the personnel director until sometime in the 50s, I guess, wasn't it? And then, who followed him?
Let's see, wait a minute. No, he stayed longer.
Or was he up in the 60s? He told us, and I can't remember.
He was,
Yeah.
let me see. Didn't Harold Cutler follow him?
I think Harold followed him.
Well, then that was, that was about, I'd say about 1970,
70?
70 or 71.
Okay.
It was just a couple of years before I retired.
Okay, so you had Bill Mahoney as a boss for a pretty long stretch of time in there. Because I assume as the last jobs that you had, you worked directly for him, so to speak.
Well, I worked directly for him all those years.
How did Bill manage? If you can tell me.
Ask Bill. I'd rather not comment on
Okay,
that.
I'm just curious. I mean, there's two sides to looking at how
Yeah.
people manage, from the guy's view and from the person that works for his view.
Bill was, he got along fine with the union people. But he might cuss them behind the table along the line
Mm-hmm.
with them, but that was his way of doing.
Yeah.
He got along with it. I'd say he got along with the union better than he did some of the people he worked for.
Mm-hmm. Who were some of the other people out in the plant that you had to deal with, Andy, and what can you remember about those individuals?
I dealt with everybody in the plant. All the old superintendents.
Like, yeah, maybe Mike Minnow.
Yeah, sure. Dealt with Mike Minnow all the time. Never had any problems with Mike.
Mike was what I call an old schooler, wasn't he?
Yeah,
He'd
that's
been
right.
there for
Yeah.
years and years.
Yeah, great guy. And then Bill Slachter. Bill and I were good friends. In fact, he's been down here to see me since I retired. He and his wife. They invited us over to England. We went over there while he was there.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave us quite a treat while we were over there.
Tell me about Mike Minnow. Don't know much about him.
Mike was one of the old school, and he was another one who had a thorough knowledge of assembly line operations.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew how to get along with his people, but he didn't take much nonsense from them. And he was a good friend of Red Cherry and Russ Estelle. Do you remember him?
Mm-hmm. Don't remember him.
Russ Estelle is an old-time restaurateur
Oh, yes.
in Lansing.
I remember that name now.
He used to run the concession at the Elks Club, and then he eventually came down to the plant as the caterer there. And talking about Russ Estelle and Wolfram, and a strike that Estelle had. You ought to read a memo that I researched and wrote for Wolfram once when we were having some problems in that area. I hope it's still in the file someplace.
Probably gone.
But I did a lot of work on that, trying to preserve the rights of
Okay. Back to the,
well, the Estelle Catering Company was being managed, and Mr. Estelle, I believe, was dead at that time. But he was operating the catering concession in Oldsmobile before he died. And then it continued, but Merle Gardner, who used to be the assistant manager, and Jim Glotter, incidentally got a Christmas card from Jim. And he called me when we were up there in Lansing in September. I had a long chat with him. And if you were a hunter, I'd give you a copy of Mr. Glotter's recipe for cooking wild ducks. No, got the world by the tail. I've got it right. But they had a strike, and Mr. Wolfram wanted to kick them out. And I thought that was grossly unfair. It'd be kind of like kicking Oldsmobile out of business when they had the strike. So I wrote a complete history of the business and why they were in there and what they had done for Oldsmobile. And so the succession, of course, Mr. Gardner died, and Renee Hammer, took over the business and operated until after I left. And now he owns the Portland Golf Club. But that gave quite a lot of history in that memo, things that had happened at Oldsmobile.
was that our normal way to handle the cafeterias, Andy, to kind of hire an outside caterer
Yes,
to run those?
we have never handled them
Never
that I
did it
can
ourselves.
recall. Let me see. I don't recall that we ever handled them directly.
Okay.
And that is a usual thing in GM. If you really want headaches, then try operating a
Yeah, a food service.
food service business.
What about, Andy, the I remember back to the Christmas parties and the football bus and those kinds of things. How did those come to pass?
Well, that came to pass many years ago by the organization of the so-called executive club, which included all the mayor's salaried personnel. They wanted to do something for them. And we, of course, elected to have a dinner. We used to have these other activities like the annual picnic out at Eden Rapids, Ionia, wherever.
Yeah.
And then we had a meeting, what was it, once a month? Once a month, I believe, we used to have these executive club dinners, and it gave the general manager an opportunity to tell everybody who was working at Oldsmobile and on salary what was going on in the business and what the plans were. And in addition to that, of course, we would use, at some occasions in a way, we'd have some models on the floor. We used to have all these meetings in the engineering auditorium, you know, before we got to go into the Civic Center. And we'd have some new cars on the floor, and we would have some guest speakers, and we had some marvelous speakers over the years. They were usually inspirational speakers, sometimes comics, and ordinarily a show to go with it, with very well-known personalities in the theater or the movies to appear.
When did those things start happening?
To be honest with you, I can't remember, but I think that they were happening when I went.
When you came?
Yeah.
Okay, so they started before that.
Yeah, I think they did. I think, I don't know whether Mr. Skinner started those or not.
Okay.
No, a man named Bernard was a manager there at one time, I believe. Do you know about him? I don't know whether that was just before Mr. Skinner, and he built that house, I think. I almost bought it one time. That'd be where 496 is now. But there was a beautiful house built on the corner of Main and Townsend on the southwest corner, which is just a block from, just above what's now Building 70.
Sure.
You know. And he was the manager, I was told, of Oldsmobile. And it seems to me there was some connection between him and Bill Freeman. Did you know Bill Freeman?
Oh yes, very well.
Bill was a good friend of mine. In fact, he asked me to be attorney for the Michigan Audubon Society once. And he had Roger Torrey Peterson there to pick up a new Oldsmobile one time. Are you a bird watcher?
My dad is.
Well, he knows who Roger Torrey Peterson is.
Oh yes. Yeah.
And well, these outings we had were pretty good, and then we would try to develop something a little different. You know, once a year, I believe, you took the whole family and the kids and everybody, you know, out to Ionia, and they'd have a game set up and prizes and this and that. And then, of course, the Christmas party and this kind of, everybody always looked forward to those things.
And the football game quit, though.
Yeah.
We quit doing that.
Yeah.
At some point in time.
Yeah,
I don't remember when.
and we had, I was going to say about 2,200 people we would feed at the Civic Center at those last dinners. And now we couldn't find parking space down there when they only have 800. I don't quite understand it.
Kind of odd, isn't it, how that changes. How about, Andy, back to the superintendent bunch again. Do you remember, like, who might have been our engine plant guy?
Yes, indeed, Lou Church.
Okay, Louis Church.
Lou Church, and I wrote Lou's will for him.
Okay, tell us about Lou Church. He's another person we don't know about.
Well, Lou was for years superintendent of the motor plant, and he was about your size, and a very active guy, and really knew the business of making motors, I thought. And everybody liked him, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm.
And so Lou came in one day, wanted to know if I'd write a will for him, and I did. And I don't know how he happened to do it right at that time, but it was 2 or 3 years, maybe more than that, before he passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And he was not an old man then.
This was before he retired or after he retired?
Oh, this was long before he retired.
Okay.
I did a lot of free things for people. And then he was followed, I believe, by Harold Horton. Or was it? No, Elmer Corbin, I believe, was over there first in the motor plant. And then they sent him over in charge of Plant 2.
Yeah, he was at Plant 2 for a period of time.
Elmer and I were good friends, too.
Go back to Louis Church, if you would.
Yeah.
Was Louis a plant kind of guy that came up through the shop, that side?
I don't know what his earlier background was,
okay.
but
Did he?
incidentally, speaking of the motor plant,
Okay.
I remember 1 or 2 bad floods
Okay.
that got into the motor plant.
All right.
Did you know about that?
The flood of '48, I think I remember somebody said
Mhm.
did. I wasn't there, but
Yeah.
what did we do? Shut it down?
Shut it down. That's how you didn't have any choice.
Yeah.
And yeah. But the water that time was up and got in the McFarland's basement, and he lived way up
Yeah.
from the river, you know,
Yeah.
down where
Yeah.
Mount Hope
Yeah.
comes into town down there on Pershing. And Paul Taylor, who was chief police, and his house had about 6 feet of water in the basement. Mac pumped the water out of his basement, and of course it caved
The
in.
walls caved in.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Never again.
Yeah, right. Better leave the water.
Yeah.
What did Louis Church? Can you tell us how he might have managed the place at all?
I would, and I knew a good many of the foremen who worked for him, and I presume that unless there was some problem, that he let them handle their own
They ran the show.
show. Yeah. But he was, Lou was.
From a labor.
I would say he was autocratic, but he was the boss of the place. Everybody knew that.
Yeah. In those early days, were the labor relations problems more related to any particular plant, or were they just
No, that
general in
had
scope?
to do more with who they elected the union committeeman and what area he was in.
All right.
I think by and large our superintendents and supervisory group as a whole really tried to follow the rules and tried to get along with their people. Sometimes, of course, that was not necessary. You get somebody who is a little off-key here and there.
Well, you had personalities on both
Oh,
sides.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure you did. But Lou was not a little Caesar in any manner of speaking. He ran the place, but I never heard any of his men say anything ill about him. And Elmer Corbin, of course, was just one of the nicest guys you'd ever meet any place. Harold Horton came after him. You probably knew Harold.
Yes, I knew both of those people, Elmer and Harold.
And then, of course, let's see, in the fellow named Montgomery was, I believe, in charge of the tool job that Bob Stevenson had, and then Bob Barlow, what did we call that?
Oh, is that the design, the tool design,
Yeah,
or not tool design?
not design, but they were in charge of buying all the tools.
The process, yeah, whatever we call those people
And,
at those times. Master mechanic.
Bob Stevenson, of course, was a Scotsman. He came over here from Scotland, and he was there a long time. And then, let's see, Howdy Kane was in salvage a long time. Yeah, a lot of people working for him too.
Yes.
And Freeman, I'm trying to think of who was in the press room. Oh, Vic Forster. Did you know him?
No, did not.
He was in the press room. Vic, was he in charge of the press room? Mr. Fuller, I believe he was superintendent. Vic Forster,
Mhm.
real nice guy.
Mhm.
And I was trying to think, assembly, well, material handling. Axle plant.
Ah, yes.
Roy Carter, of course, was in
Ray
there a
Carter.
long time.
Yeah.
And Bob Scott after Ray. I've got an old picture of the first Dale Carnegie class here.
You do?
Yeah,
Huh. I should borrow that from you.
okay.
See if it's one I got. I got some of.
It's the first class.
Yeah. I
In
can't
fact,
remember.
Wolfram is in that class.
Somebody gave me a copy of that. They, of a Dale Carnegie class. I don't know whether it was the first one or not.
Yeah.
Don't remember who.
Well, this one has a lot of old timers. I was just,
Yeah.
why don't you cut this off a minute? I'll see if I can find it.